Today I'm going to be introducing Poolbeg Pharma, who've kindly set up this session to talk about immunotherapy and oncology. And I'm going to hand over now to Ed Boucher, who's going to moderate the session and introduce the panel to you. Thanks for now. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Mike. And good afternoon to you all. Welcome to this panel discussion on cancer immunotherapy. You may be aware that this has been a big growth area in the world of pharma over the last 10 years, really. There have been a couple of really mega blockbuster drugs in this area. Merck's Keytruda, which I think did about $25 billion of sales 2 years ago. That's an astonishing figure. And also Bristol Meyers Squibb's Opdivo, another big one. And then there have been many smaller copycat drugs and other immunotherapy drugs coming along the way. Many people expect that there's a huge amount of growth to come in this area, lots of potential for new treatments and treatments for side effects, as we'll hear in a minute, all sorts of different growth areas to come. And I think we've got an excellent panel to discuss the topic. We'll be explaining what cancer immunotherapy actually is. We'll be talking about the market and how it will evolve. And we will also be looking at how investors can make money from this development. And as I say, excellent panel. We have in the middle, we have Dr. Martin Kaiser, or Professor Kaiser. He is a consultant haematologist at the Royal Marsden, of course, a world-leading cancer hospital. He's also a clinician scientist at the Institute of Cancer Studies. So he gives us a medical and an academic input into this panel discussion. Here on my immediate right, we have Jeremy Skillington. He is the CEO of Poolbeg Pharma that Mike mentioned a minute ago. It's an up-and-coming biotech firm that, amongst other things, is developing a drug just about to go into phase 2 studies that's dealing with a challenge, shall we say, that arises from immunotherapy treatments. So Jeremy can give us a sort of the business angle on immunotherapy. And then last but not least, at the far end, I've got Dr. Brian White. He is the head of healthcare research at Shore Capital. He's been analyzing and watching the healthcare sector for over 30 years. Normally, when you meet a city analyst, you know, he or she left Cambridge 5 years ago. They really don't know what's what. This gentleman, he really does know what he's talking about. He did, I think, 16 years at Deutsche Capital, amongst other things. So he's a real expert. We're very lucky to have all three panelists. I'm delighted to be with them. Should we give them all a round of applause to welcome them in? So I'd like to start, if I may, with Martin, Dr. Kaiser, and perhaps you could tell us briefly what cancer immunotherapy is and what sort of impact it's made on patients.
Cancer immunotherapy nowadays can actually mean quite a number of things, but most importantly, it is a very smart treatment, regardless of which type of cancer immunotherapy you use, because ultimately it is aiming to really hit the tumor cell and reduce the tumor and ideally even cure people without targeting, as our old chemotherapies did, lots of healthy tissues as well. So actually it's really been for a long time in the making. I remember how immunotherapy was actually already a lot spoken about when I went to medical school. I think there was even a phase where people thought it might not happen. And then suddenly, I think over the last years, it just has taken a massive step forward. I think the immunotherapies that are having the greatest potential and making the biggest impact now on patients are the ones that are directly interacting, making the immune system interact and target the tumor. And the most recent developments in there are, for example, CAR T cells. I think quite a number of people will have heard about them already because they transformed a number of diseases already. I work in blood cancer specifically. Blood cancers have, throughout the development in oncology, always played a pioneering role. The very first curative treatment was for blood cancer, and likewise, the very first targeted immunotherapy, like CAR T cells, were for a blood cancer. So I think the development that we are seeing in our diseases are often something that then translates several years after into a much wider field of oncological entities, and that has really been the case in the past, and I think it's the same going to be for these type of immunotherapies. The CAR T cells are actually a type of treatment that needs a lot of laboratory manipulation of immune cells by the patient. They get effectively reprogrammed outside of the body to them being reinfused into the patient in their first iteration. But we're now seeing newer developments even whereby that process happens inside the patient to just being given a effectively information material, DNA, that transforms, reprograms some of these cells inside the body to attack the tumor. And then there are other types of treatments that are also in the newer generation of immunotherapies, whereby we use antibodies to actually glue together the cells from the immune system very, very specifically just with cells from the tumor. And that way we effectively tell the immune system, this is like an infection, kill this now. And that was the thing that historically cancer managed to evade. It managed to not be identified by the immune system. And these antibodies do exactly the opposite. They bring these cells so closely together and glue them together that the immune system thinks this is really something that they need to fight. And they do it very, very effectively. So just to your second part of your question, in my disease area at the moment, it's completely transforming the disease at the moment. And as I said, I'm working in multiple myeloma, one of the blood cancers. It's an incurable cancer, and median life expectancy for patients was normally about 3 to 4 years a long time ago. It then got extended over time, but this time we're now seeing with these very new immunotherapies that patients, even when they have already exhausted all other treatment options, the disease gets into a remission and stays in there for 3 or 4 years. The time that it was overall their life expectancy some 10 years ago, just by this type of treatment, and there is no end yet. We have not seen the median duration of that yet. It's actually still ongoing. It's really amazing.
So in layman's terms, we're seeing dramatic increases in life expectancy and not using traditional chemotherapies, so your hair isn't falling out, all that sort of stuff. So all sorts of attractions and potential here. Moving on to Brian then, can you tell us a bit more, looking at this market from a business perspective? Where are we now? How big is it now? And how big do you think it could get?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I think it's in its broadest sense, it's a very large market already. And as Martin very ably described, it's compartmentalized. So the more mature part of it's 50 years old. That's about $60 billion today. You mentioned Keytruda. That's about half of that. Mm-hmm. And we're beginning to see now the emergence of the CAR T and the bispecific antibodies that Martin spoke about. Today, they're about $7 or $8 billion each. But what we're beginning to see over time is that these are moving earlier in treatment cycles, and so they have the potential to be, as big as the original immunotherapy drugs as well. So it's a very large market indeed.
Okay, so I'll start with you. I'm going to ask this question to all three of you, but I'll start it with Jeremy. What do you think is the biggest opportunity now for immunotherapy, and what's the biggest challenge, do you think?
Yeah, well, the opportunity, I think Martin has kind of excellently articulated where we are. I think there's greater hope, let's say, greater understanding of the biology of disease. These, say, the CAR Ts, bispecifics, or tri-specific antibodies coming through. As Martin said, kind of basically bringing the cancer cell closer to the immune system and resolving that. That's in the hematological, the blood cancers. There is, heading down the road now of looking at solid tumors. Is there a direction they can take there? Much tougher nut to crack, as it were. But the physicians and the clinicians and the scientists are understanding the disease as a much deeper level. And once you understand the disease, then you can come up with a solution. So I think let's just say as a general population, I mean, the future is bright in that regard. Nobody wants to obviously get cancers, but I think that, it's improvement upon improvement. And gradually, as Martin says, you're going to ultimately see some cures, not across the board, but that's what's exciting. I think the challenge, and this is something from a kind of a Poolbeg perspective we observed several years ago, as we were looking at our internal programs. We have a drug, it's an oral, a small molecule drug that we were initially looking at for severe influenza that was linked to these cytokine storms that happens, in influenza patients. And as the cancer immunotherapies were growing, we noticed there was also these cytokine storms that were happening with the CAR Ts and the bispecifics, these cytokine release syndrome. And we kind of knuckled down and said, listen, this is something we could improve upon here.
Sure.
And I think the key link to us was that what the clinicians use right now is a very reactive manner. So a patient will get a bispecific, as an example, and the average is about 70% of these patients develop a cytokine release syndrome, CRS. So the physicians know it's going to happen, not necessarily which patients will, but they know the vast majority of patients will develop this CRS, and it's a watch and wait. So they're in these dedicated cancer clinics, watch and wait, a lot of attention from nurses, from docs, and if CRS develops, then they're in there quite rapidly, giving them an antibody against a cytokine target called interleukin 6. So this is an antibody that was on the market for rheumatoid arthritis and repositioned or repurposed, to target IL-6, and that calms, the immune system back down, kind of manages the patients that have developed CRS. So we recognize with our drug, POLB001, we also hit interleukin 6. We have data to show where you hit that target, but a multitude of other cytokines, IL-8, IL-10, TNF-alpha. So we're looking at multiple cytokines. And what you see is in these cytokine storms that there's a lot of cytokines are up. So we did, some analysis. We talked to a lot of, physicians, clinicians, looked at the marketplace in particular. And we were very keen to see that we could see an optimal solution here is that we could prevent CRS from starting in the first place, because we have clinical data we generate ourselves where we gave healthy volunteers our drug, then we triggered their immune system with a bacterial fragment called LPS, but with our drug on board, their immune system didn't react. As Martin said, the immune system was thinking there was going to be an infection, but we kind of suppressed that inflammatory response. So now we're looking at transitioning that now into this cancer immunotherapy space. We could prevent CRS. The patients can get their drug. They can go home afterwards. They don't have to stay in hospital for a long time. So there's multiple advantages. So we're very excited to move that forward, and we've got a clinical trial planned and designed and to begin later this year.
We'll come back a bit more CRS in a minute, but I just want to go back to the question, if I may, with Martin. What do you see as perhaps the biggest opportunity or the biggest challenge for immunotherapy, cancer immunotherapy?
I think it's clearly the depth and the targeted way how we can really help many patients with cancer where we couldn't before, or offer much fewer side effects on average in the long run. I think there is, of course, this hurdle. It is it's still something novel, and actually a lot of the care for cancer ultimately has to happen not only at very specialized centers as the one, the type of setup that Jeremy just described, but actually it also happens in the community and community centers. If you look globally, of course, many of the processes that happen have to be manageable, even if you have only limited time to care for the patient, or if you have a team that's maybe not completely skilled only in treating one disease. So actually, CRS plays into this, for example, because at the moment it needs such a specialized knowledge with the way how it is dealt with at the moment, that it is limited to very specialized centers. In some economies like the US, for example, the treatment centers have to even apply for a license to be able to give these drugs because of CRS, so that they demonstrate and that they document beforehand that they can deal with it.
So CRS is a big problem.
CRS is a big problem, yeah.
And potentially it would enable immunotherapy to come into the more sort of local area hospitals as opposed to specialist cancer centers.
For the existing therapies at the moment, yes, that. B, I think there are other treatments that we're just seeing emerge at the moment, for example, like these newer types whereby only the DNA is injected to actually create what we call in vivo. So within the patient, we're generating the drug, and these will probably even have higher CRS rates than what we have at the moment. So CRS is a problem, and it might, depending on which disease we look at and how the treatment works, actually how the treatment is generated, it might even increase in difficulty to deal with it with the current standard, that we need new solutions that they all can be addressed easily.
I'll come back to CRS again in a minute, but I just want to go back to the original question with Brian. What do you think is perhaps the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge for immunotherapy?
Yeah, I think from an industry perspective, what we're seeing is that the drugs that we mentioned earlier, which are now more mature, are moving towards a loss of exclusivity. So these $27 or $29 billion of sales potentially evaporating at the end of the decade. And so what the industry has been trying to do is to look at complementary or combinations with these original immuno-oncology drugs. That hasn't worked very well. However, there's the...
So you have a combination, then you can extend the patent,
That's right.
and Merck can carry it.
Exactly, and there's just a general recognition that if your immune system is more intact, i.e. at earlier lines, then you're more likely to benefit from an immunotherapy. So that's where the industry is putting a lot of money just now. All of the big pharma companies are expending a lot of money in that. Because of that risk of lost revenues at the end of the decade, we're seeing a lot of these earlier stage companies getting bought. So,
and what are the companies doing with this? Are they developing completely new, original immunotherapies, which obviously would have a long runway of patent protection?
Yes.
Or are they just tweaking existing products, which is what pharmaceutical companies often do, and then hoping to get an extra 7
I think it's fair to say it's a novel approach, and it's very much being informed by the science and by the data and by the clinical data that we're getting that's emerging just now.
Okay, let's come back to CRS that's been mentioned already. Jeremy, I think you've told us what your drug does, but I mean, how does it compare to any other treatments out there? I mean, I think medics are currently using tocilizumab, and there are other treatments being developed by other rival companies in the labs at the moment, trials.
Yeah, there's actually surprisingly very few. Again, marketing comment like tocilizumab is kind of a standard. There's another drug, Kineret, which targets TNF. They use steroids, which a lot of clinicians try to avoid. It's a bit of a, maybe it's too kind of drastic, kind of off side effects. So there's actually very few, because you have to kind of realize that CRS is a relatively recent development. As the explosion of these cancer immunotherapies, has developed, the recognition that CRS is occurring, people are, again, getting off the start line. We have, and again, I find this kind of particularly interesting from us, is that, we feel we had a head start because we already had a drug, we already had human data, and so it was kind of quite an easy kind of adjustment to kind of head down this road. And I will kind of comment, when we were discussing internally about taking this track, we spoke to a lot of pharma companies, and we were kind of thinking that, you've got a bispecific, we've got a drug we think could prevent, and that, they were really kind of sitting on their chairs, and they were like, oh, I see, that this is something that's of great benefit or potential benefit. We talked about, pharma is always keen to, drive revenues of their existing drugs, and, how do they do that? You're getting it into more patients. So they see that with our drug to prevent CRS, that would actually release a lot of the beds that the patients take up for a week or two in these dedicated cancer clinics, and that you'd have more patients coming through the system. So they see, hang on, this, remove CRS, and there could be a greater market, so it's making the pie bigger. So they're very intrigued, and as I say, that's where we are right now, starting this proof of concept trial later this year.
So the strategy is to do this trial, and hopefully it succeeds, the drug looks good, and then you might be looking for partners with big pharma companies.
Absolutely, and and I've worked in big pharma biotech for the last 23 years, and I've been on both sides of the deal table. And what really gets pharma interested in moving is human data. So we have human data in healthy volunteers, but now they look for human patient data, and that's where this phase 2 trial comes in. So we'll be in multiple myeloma patients looking at the CRS response and seeing if we can suppress that CRS response.
Now, Brian may correct. I think it's fair to say for a drug that's going into phase 2, so the first time it's still a relatively small clinical trial in humans, and you're not just looking at the safety now, you're also looking at the efficacy. Does this drug work? So we're just beginning that point, the proof of concept point for this drug that Poolbeg is doing. And at this point, I think it's fair to say that on average, you'd expect there's about a 30% chance that the drug would actually reach the market in the end, that it gets through all the trials and the regulators give it the thumbs up. Do you think that's a fair figure for your product, or do you think something about your product makes it different? Or Brian, you could come in on that as well. Jeremy, you start.
You can start, Brian.
All right, Brian, you start then. Okay.
I think, to be fair, what you do is you look at every different opportunity based on how indicative preclinical data are and what you'd expect to see in a clinical setting. And that differs from different therapeutic area from one to the next. Obviously, cancer is much more challenging, but at the same time, what we're looking at here is something which is dampening down something that's being released by the body in response to something it's being challenged with. So you would like to think that if you were tossing a coin, it would be better odds than that, frankly.
Couldn't agree more, Brian. I will add, I agree completely. From our perspective, there's different kind of types of drugs. Let's say if you've already, developed a tumor or cancer, you're diagnosed relatively late. It's difficult kind of to go back up the track, to kind of cure a disease, bring it back up. What we are doing at Poolbeg, is preventing this CRS from happening in the first place. Again, for a lot of diseases, they always say prevention is better than cure. So we're preventing it from stopping in the first place, allowing the cancer drug to do its work, but we're preventing that inflammatory, that immune response you don't want to see. So I think, I agree with Brian. I think the chances are better because we are only going to be giving our another side to this is that we're going to be giving our drug for roughly 2 weeks. Some days before, some days afterwards, which is a very narrow window to keep the immune system under control. It's not a chronic disease where you got to be on it for the rest of your life, for example. So I think the risks are a lot lower. But again, in that oncology setting, managing CRS, we don't believe we'll affect the actual efficacy of the cancer drug itself, which is important. So we're kind of a standalone. So I think we've mitigated a lot of those risks from the data we've already generated, but again, from the proof of concept or from the understanding the biology of the CRS as well.
And Brian, if things go really well, how much revenue could POLB 001 generate?
Well, I think one of the things that we've described here is this ability of moving these immunotherapies to earlier lines. And a key aspect of that is one's going to be cost, which is getting people out of the kind of hospital setting, and is going to be able to treat this kind of bottleneck that we have just now. And I think our estimates suggest that if the drug is successful, then it could easily be over several $1 billion. So I think our kind of peak sales estimate, which is unrisked just now, would be $2 billion.
And obviously Poolbeg would get a cut of that, but it wouldn't. The partner would get a big chunk of it as well.
Yep. What's interesting, if I can add, from our discussions with farmers, like the clinical trial that we're running this year is with an approved bispecific antibody. And we approached pharma companies and 2 of them had agreed to give us drug. We've selected one. But we believe that if there's positive data from that trial, we can use that data, or we can see from a proof of concept that would also work in any of the other bispecifics. And indeed, separately, we look at the CAR-Ts, it'll work with CAR-Ts. Because again, I go back and reiterate, this is preventing CRS from beginning in the first place. It's not reacting and trying to dampen it, it's preventing. So you can apply it to any of the bispecifics that develop CRS, the CAR-Ts, the trispecifics, anything that develops CRS, we can prevent that from beginning. So I think you're right. So it's not just pairing with one drug, it's pairing with many. So I think we can drive revenue that way.
Moving away from Poolbeg just for a minute, I mean, Brian, what are some of the other attractive investment opportunities within immunotherapy? Are there other attractive opportunities out there?
Yeah, it's a very complex field, and obviously Marsden's a much better position than I am to tell you where the opportunities are, certainly from a therapeutic perspective. But certainly what we can see here is that it's very clear that we're still trying to understand exactly how the immune system is going to help us to provide these durable responses with an acceptable safety profile. And what we are beginning to see now is, other, safety signals coming out of some of these longer-term CAR-T studies. So it's
just so you've got new exciting products coming through, and yet there's some concerns about side effects while having done long trials.
So that's right. So the key here is going to be the data, but I think it's very clear it's going to be combination data here. But as Martin described earlier on, it's the durability of the response here which is the most impressive. So for a lot of these CAR-T therapies, these are one-off treatments generally. And ultimately in future, what hopefully we'll have is, Martin mentioned the laboratory manipulation required. If we can have off-the-shelf type treatments, that used outside of the hospital setting, that's a game changer.
Yeah. So Martin, do you think we'll get there? That sort of, does that be a pill or an injection? Just simple as that? Is that where we're heading?
Probably. I mean, I think many of the treatments are already subcutaneous injections. So in theory, it could be applied already, at least in people that are instructed or that have access to some form of community nursing at home. Whether it will become a tablet-based treatment, we don't know yet. I think most of these are probably needing some form of injection, but actually, nevertheless, in how they're being given, once you overcome these hurdles, they're actually strikingly simple already. It's either once a week or once every 2 weeks an injection. I mean, to be fair, that's not different to what you do in many other much less aggressive diseases than cancer. Like think about rheumatoid diseases, or think about even weight loss drugs now. I mean, this is as such from the ease of how it's given, it's not that difficult actually.
So then if we look ahead sort of 5 or 10 years, what for you, Martin, would be the best case scenario with immunotherapy? Where would we be at? Lots of CAR T products, presumably. What else might we see?
Yeah, it's kind of like making me slightly scared because it could put me out of job kind of slightly as well. But, which is a good thing. Yeah, that was a good thing, of course, for anyone. But I think to the point from before, that you made about whether things are being just tweaked or whether there's real innovation. I think there's real innovation happening at the moment, and it's really it's been taking me by absolute surprise, I have to say, in terms of I wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago where we're at now, and at the moment there is no reason, or I don't see yet a limit actually to that, because you're suddenly playing around with it really like in an engineering laboratory. You're now suddenly combining, as you mentioned, someone mentioned already, the tri-specific antibodies. So you're actually using kind of logical combinations how to identify a tumor cell so separately from everything else in the body that you're probably going to reduce the side effects even more over time and increase the effect against it more. I think for blood cancers, very clearly, I have a very positive outlook. Of course, for the solid cancers that we have spoken about before already, there are still several hurdles that need to be taken. It will not be every disease. It will not be, but actually even in the difficult to treat solid cancers, suddenly, I think this is the big game changer. Before we saw a lot of developments happening in blood cancers where we couldn't quite relate that to any progress being made in solid cancers. That's different now. We're suddenly seeing reports of a new CAR T or a new T-cell receptor targeting treatment, even in a disease like pancreatic cancer, where no one ever could make progress in before, work. And I think that is really making a difference at the moment to before.
I mean, Brian, do you think the likes of the big pharmas, who we know their names, the GSKs, the Astras, whoever, the Mercks, is anyone in any of those companies actually a bit worried because they've got their currently successful cancer drug dealing with the solid cancers, and are they worrying, thinking, actually, crikey, immunotherapy? It feels like it's almost a bit like AI, it's now taking off, that actually they're going to replace existing drugs that are still patent protected, that are still making money.
So I'm going to answer that slightly differently. So if you can think back to the onset of when HIV was a killer, and at that time it was 100% fatality rate. We're now in a position where it's a chronic disease. Now we could be in a position with immunotherapy where cancer, not all cancers, but many cancers, that could be the outlook for the industry. Now that's a very positive outlook for the industry, I would have said. The HIV drugs still sell extremely well, and I'm sure cancer drugs will too.
Yeah. Okay. And are there any other cancer immunotherapy drugs in the pipeline that you particularly like the look of?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think what I would say, though, is that to me the most exciting aspect just now is the moving from later lines to earlier lines. That's what we want to see, because, as I said earlier, if your immune system is more competent, then you're going to get a better outcome. Yeah.
Okay, coming back to Poolbeg and you, Jeremy, we know you're just starting the phase 2 trials. If things go well, when might your product actually get to market, be approved?
Yeah, that's a good question. So from a Poolbeg standpoint, just to give the timeline, starting the trial before the end of the year. Luckily, or fortunately, we're looking at just the immune response of these patients. So we'll be able to, it's open label, so we'll be able to track every patient, and their responses. So next year we'll have the interim data coming through, and then the trial will be completed by the end of next year. And that'll be a really good picture. And then that'll be partnering with Pharma. And then what happens from a Poolbeg standpoint is that we take our drug, our intellectual property, our data sets, partner with Pharma. They'll take it forward from there. So they'll be on a very aggressive timeline. And because we also have orphan drug designation from the FDA, which again there's many different benefits of that, but they see the benefit that our drug could do. So there could be that kind of accelerated progression through the clinic. It'll be in partnership with a pharma company with their drug, just moving that forward. So it depends. The potential is to go straight to a phase 3 and run that. So, you could be looking at, it'll be a few years yet, but it'll be down to the pharma to kind of push that forward rapidly.
So just quickly on the orphan drug thing, it is I'm sure many or maybe all of you know it is a big deal. And I think I'm right in saying, Jeremy, it potentially speeds up the regulatory process. Yeah. It also potentially extends effectively the patent life of the drug, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing for us, you get 7 years of market exclusivity in the US, and that's huge from a Poolbeg standpoint, but obviously from our pharma partner, because again, they've got this kind of a clear open field of commercialization once it's approved. But there's also significant benefits. You get some tax benefits for clinical trials. You do get, I like to say, the red telephone to the FDA. You can have a direct line into them for questions around your clinical trials. So that's very beneficial as well. And there's a few others. But I think from a partnering standpoint, that's very advantageous for Poolbeg to have that, because our partners, and like I'll say this, the big pharma company who are giving us, providing us the drug, for the clinical trial, they've essentially indicated no problem at all. We'll give this to you. Their head of multiple myeloma sent a quick email after we announced that we got the orphan drug designation, congratulating us, because again he can see the benefits of this. It takes it's a high hurdle to get through the FDA to get that approval, so we've achieved that mark. So it's good recognition from us, but I think it kind of gives us several advantages, including that market exclusivity.
And you're getting interest from potential partners that we've all heard of in this room.
That we've all heard of course, and. Basically, again, I go back to my point earlier on, they like to see human data, and their bar is human data, in patients, and that's why we're running this trial. And they're interested to see the outcomes of this trial as well, because I say they've essentially committed to give us the drug, which costs a lot of money, and for them to give that. So they want to see the data that we get from this 2A trial. And then the plan is for us, essentially, is that if the data is positive, as I mentioned, we can apply this to other bispecific antibodies. So we'll have multiple discussions. It's not just in the bag, say for one pharma. We'll have multiple discussions to see who the best partner will be to take this forward.
And Brian, what sort of royalty rate do you think Poolbeg might get for this drug from the big? I'm not going to ask Jerry because he's obviously going to say 70% or something ridiculous, but or he won't want to say at all for good reasons. So Brian might be giving us a figure.
I think it's very clear that there are conversations to be had, and ultimately what you want as a partner is to have the same strategic objective and to deliver a drug which is meaningful to both parties. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is that generally, if you have got a drug which is has a good clinical data, then you would like to see a teens royalty rate. But then it's a balance between royalty rate up front and whether you want to retain as much value for the company by taking a smaller upfront and a larger royalty rate, or a balance of that. Yeah. So it's
okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? We've got a gentleman right there at the back. Fine, let's give him the mic, yes, please.
Hi, Jeremy. You may have covered this, but what cancer type is showing the most positive reaction to current immunotherapy? Yep. And are you focusing more on that particular cancer type, or are you taking a broader view? Yeah.
We've Martin, is probably a better place to answer, but I will say from our commercial analysis, we kind of, again, as I talk as a team 2 years ago, thinking we think this is a good idea. We want to be sure this is a good idea. So we talked to a lot of clinicians, insurance, payers, etc., looking at the market, key opinion leaders about what their thoughts on this was. We did narrow it down to multiple myeloma and diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, which are primary where they say these blood cancers where the market will go, and that's a subset. There's obviously more than that. That's where we focused our interest. So I think that's where we've seen, from the bispecific CAR-Ts, the best success. But obviously Martin's talked about the potential. Now it's inching down there for solid tumors. And, again, the question is, what's the CRS rates there as well? So, we have to see that, because obviously we're coming at this from the CRS standpoint. So that's our starting point, let's say, multiple myeloma, diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in our analysis. And I will say our market analysis was slightly bigger, significantly bigger than the numbers that Brian had cited. But we see, as I say, if we can pair or partner our drug with any and all of the bispecifics and trispecifics and CAR-Ts that drive CRS, our market will grow exponentially. So we just started, I just thought from that analysis, we'll start with just the multiple myeloma, diffuse large B-cell lymphoma.
Any more questions? Yes, we've got two here, yes. The gentleman there, and then after him, there's a lady up near the front.
Yeah, thank you very much. You mentioned how the nature of research is that even at quite late stages, quite a few possible treatments won't work. That's the nature of the game. Are you finding that it's becoming easier or quicker to identify which is going to work and which isn't? Because obviously that has an awful lot of implications for costs and therefore new funding and results further down the line.
All right. That's interesting. I'll take that from an interpretation, an angle, and please correct me if I'm wrong. We look at this, and one of our discussions earlier, and I kind of mentioned, that 70% of patients roughly develop CRS. It's somewhat unpredictable who that 70% is, from the start. So we see our drug will be applicable to all comers. And I know at some points you're looking for, this kind of patient stratification. Let's see who will benefit, who won't. But I think we're in that kind of, with the 70% area, we can give it to everybody. Again, for the issue that we're suppressing, we're kind of controlling that immune response. So we feel it could be applicable to essentially, anybody. So it'll be kind of across the board. But maybe it's more on the, as I say, different drug types. I take your point, about stratification. You need to, patients with, say, certain mutations for certain drugs, you want to find them first. But I think happily, fortunately, I think we can give the drugs to all comers. And, so that kind of opens up the market even further, I think.
Mike, there's a lady up here near the front.
Hi. I work in patents, and I know that you're excluded from getting patents for methods of treatment of the human body by therapy. And I was wondering if this has caused any problems, or if it's sufficient just to patent the antibodies themselves.
Yeah, we'll say the antibodies we're using, obviously our partner, that's their intellectual property, that's their matter. We have filed patents on methods of treatment, methods of use, the use of a p38 MAP kinase, and I will say kind of not just ours, others as well, to prevent the development of cytokine release syndrome associated with immunotherapies. We've done the kind of say pre-patent analysis and have gotten kind of good feedback on that. So it's just patent applications right now. But we're kind of pushing forward in that regard. But we believe like that we have that kind of first mover advantage. We think that there's there's innovation here to protect, and so we're kind of moving forward with that. So we think our IP advantage is that we cover not just our drug but others who want to kind of move into this, assuming our data is positive, who will want to move in. So we have that covered. So I do take it like IP is a complicated area, but I think we've got a very good IP company we're working with, patent filings, etc. So happy with the direction of travel so far.
Any more questions from the audience? No? Well, I'll ask another one before we wind up. Brian, I think, as I understand, Merck and Bristol Meyers Squibb have very much been the leaders so far. Do you think with all the new opportunities that are coming, can some of the other big pharmas catch up? Are there opportunities for them to do so? And are there things that you've got your eye on?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all pretty much doing much the same thing. I mean, they have different nuances. I mean, obviously AstraZeneca is a big player. Novartis, everyone has recognised that oncology is an area they want to be spending money in. If you think back to the days when GSK even swapped out their oncology business with Novartis for the exchange of a vaccine.
Just to interrupt you, it's interesting. You're saying they all want to be in oncology, and yes, you're implying that therefore they are in immunotherapy. So there's no other way now for oncology. Yeah, is that a fair inference?
I wouldn't say there's no other way, because if you look at some of the biggest selling drugs today, they're still small molecule drugs, targeted therapies. But at the same time, there's still this, I mean, it's not elusive, it's within our grasp, the ability to harness, as Martin said, to harness the immune system to provide something which could be not a cure, but a kind of a chronic therapy. And that's, everyone is in oncology from that perspective.
If I can add, I mean, one of the perspectives of the industry, maybe somewhat cynically, is that we're an aging population, we're getting older, and age-related diseases, etc., and cancer will always be one of those. Unfortunately, because again, it's down to kind of genetic mutations and things go wrong. So even though we're kind of living longer, I think cancer levels will come up. So they all see that, from a commercial standpoint, that there's a boon, let's say, there's a growing market, let's say, as the population grows and as the population ages. So I think everybody who's kind of worth their salt, they have an angle. Immunotherapy is a core focus, but as Brian said, sometimes they're targeting specific mutations in specific cells, that drive cancer. So what they see it as this multi-pronged approach, I guess, and immunotherapy is a key one.
And final question, Martin, you said you were worried all this immunotherapy might put you out of a job. Is that because these new products will be relatively simple and like a GP, I mean, not knocking GPs at all, but a GP could administer them, that's where we're heading for?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still some time off that, but I think it's if you look at other diseases, of course, like rheumatology, it used to be a disease area where you had lots of inpatient beds, lots of patients needing chemotherapies or very complex therapies to control the rheumatology diseases. It all moved to outpatient-based injections that patients get shipped to home by just by courier, and they apply it themselves. And ultimately, a rheumatologist nowadays looks after many more patients than they did in the past. So I don't think people will be completely out of job, but I think yes, you will probably be able to manage many more patients with fewer people if the development continues as it is at the moment. You will have a lot of technology that you need in the background. You need a lot of diagnostic technology. You need a lot of knowledge about how to apply the treatments properly. But if the development really goes in that direction, that could be one of the outcomes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, all three of you. Let's give our panel a round of applause, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That was good. Enjoy that.